The fascinating story of Buckingham Palace. Buckingham Palace is one of the most famous buildings in the world. The sight of the Queen waving from the east balcony and the changing of the guard are familiar to people around the world. But beyond the facade, Buckingham Palace has a fascinating and rich history. Buckingham Palace has served as the official London residence of the UK's sovereign since 1837 and today is the administrative headquarters of the monarch. Although in use for the many official events and receptions held by the King, the staterooms at Buckingham Palace are open to visitors every summer. Buckingham Palace has 775 rooms. These include 19 staterooms, 52 royal and guest bedrooms, 188 staff bedrooms, 92 offices, and 78 bathrooms. In measurements, the building is 108 meters long across the front, 120 meters deep, including the central quadrangle, and 24 meters high. Hello and welcome to Royal Scandal. Please do well to like, subscribe, comment and turn on the notification bell so as not to miss out on any news updates. Added to by various monarchs and decorated by others, Buckingham Palace in its current state is the result of hundreds of years of work and input from innumerable people. So, with all this in mind, let's dive into the history behind this most famous of buildings. Number 1. Buckingham House. Before Buckingham Palace was home to royalty, and before it was even a palace, it was known as Buckingham House. The core of today's palace is still the same large townhouse that the Duke of Buckingham built back in 1703. At that time, the land where the palace now sits had been in the Buckingham family for more than 150 years and the Duke thought it the perfect place to set up home. However, the Duke's son, Sir Charles Sheffield, sold the house and surrounding land to King George III in 1761 for the not small sum of £21,000. Today, with the site in such a commanding position and so close to the many restaurants near Paddington, this seems like a steal. The history of the site where Buckingham Palace stands can be traced back to the reign of James I in the early 17th century. He started a plantation of mulberries for the rearing of silkworms where the palace gardens are now located. Charles I then gave the garden to Lord Aston in 1628 and it is clear from records that a large house already existed on the site at this time. The house had many owners and tenants until, in 1698, it was let to the man who gave the house its name, John Sheffield, later the Duke of Buckingham. The Duke found the house old-fashioned, so it was demolished to create the new Buckingham House, which stood where Buckingham Palace is today. It was designed and built with the assistance of William Talman, Controller of the Works to William III, and Captain William Wynd, a retired soldier. John Fitch built the main structure by contract for £7,000. Number 2. From Home to Palace. Designating the home the new residence of his wife Charlotte, George III quickly changed the name of Buckingham House to Queen's House. Renovation was soon underway, turning the house into a home fit for royalty. In 1820, George IV abandoned the notion of a small royal getaway and began expanding the property into a full-blown palace. Even though George IV was the first monarch to make Queen's House into a royal palace, the term Buckingham Palace had been in use since at least the early 1790s. Working with architect John Nash, George IV eventually came to realize the huge sums the renovation was costing and promptly fired Nash. It fell, then, to George's son, William IV, to finish off the palace. As an interesting aside, William IV seriously considered turning the palace into the new Houses of Parliament after the original was destroyed in a fire in 1834. For whatever reason, perhaps he just liked his palace too much to give it up, he ultimately decided against this course of action. Number 3. Victoria, an official royal residence. Ascending to the throne in 1837, Queen Victoria wasted no time making Buckingham Palace the official royal residence. However, Victoria did not find a seamless pleasure palace, but a building that had significant problems. William IV had spent a great deal of time and money making the interiors look very royal, but the chimney smoked so much a good fire was impossible, the interior ventilation was so poor the palace smelled and there was a very real risk of carbon monoxide poisoning from the poorly fitted gas lamps. By 1840, however, Victoria and her husband Albert had squashed all these problems and began a life of true royal luxury. Plush, decadent and stunningly beautiful, today the palace draws millions of visitors every year, and it's easy to see why. And you won't have any trouble seeing it with our London hotels deals special offers. Even though the palace has seen modern updates in terms of heating and plumbing, today's Buckingham Palace is much the same as it was during the era of Queen Victoria. Number 4. King Edward VII. King Edward VII redecorated the interior of the palace during his reign from 1901 to 10. The new white and gold decorative scheme can today be seen in a number of the state rooms, including the ballroom. The area immediately outside Buckingham Palace also changed in the early 20th century. Edward VII conceived the idea of the Victoria Memorial and the redevelopment of the surrounding parts as a tribute to his mother Queen Victoria and her reign. The planning of the scheme took nearly 10 years, and the unveiling, led by the Queen's grandson King George V, finally took place on May 16, 1911. Number 5. King George V. The smog and soot of industrial London had, over the years, darkened the mid-19th century stone façade of Buckingham Palace. This was particularly evident by 1911, when seen next to the gleaming new Victoria Memorial Monument that now stood at the main gate. During the reign of King George V, the front of Buckingham Palace was refaced in harder-wearing Portland stone, which was more in harmony with the coloring of the memorial. Completed in 1914, this is the grand façade that overlooks the Mall today, featuring one of the most familiar sights, the famous balcony on which members of the royal family appear on special occasions. Number 6. Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. In 1962, on the initiative of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen's Gallery was created from the bombed-out ruins of the former private chapel. The Queen's Gallery was completely refurbished and expanded in 2002 to mark Queen Elizabeth II's Golden Jubilee. Whilst Buckingham Palace is seen as the administrative hub of the monarchy, it is also very much a family home, in addition to holding the Queen's Gallery and the Royal Mews. Queen Elizabeth II gave birth to Prince Charles and Prince Andrew at the palace, and to this day notice of royal births and deaths are still attached to the front railings for members of the public to read. The christenings of the King, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Prince of Wales took place in the music room, and many royal weddings have been celebrated at Buckingham Palace, most recently the Prince and Princess of Wales's. Number 7. Who is the only monarch to be born and die at Buckingham Palace? The eldest son of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert Edward, was born on November 9, 1841 at the palace. When Queen Victoria died on January 22, 1901, Albert Edward became king, and chose to reign under the name of Edward VII. On May 6, 1910, Edward VII died at the palace. He is the only monarch who was born and died at Buckingham Palace. Number 8. The palace was the target of many attacks during World War II. During World War II, Buckingham Palace managed to survive 9 separate bombing raids. King George VI and his family were advised by the government to leave London during the war. However, they chose to remain at the palace. Queen Elizabeth famously said, "The children will not leave unless I do. I shall not leave unless their father does, and the king will not leave the country in any circumstances, whatever." Number 9. Buckingham Palace is the 14th largest palace in the world. As a result of multiple alterations over the years, Buckingham Palace now contains 828,000 square feet of floor space, and the grounds span over a total of 40 acres. There are also an astonishing 775 different rooms in the palace. These include 52 royal and guest bedrooms, 19 staterooms, 92 offices, 188 staff bedrooms, and 78 different bathrooms. The grounds also contain a swimming pool, cinema, post office, doctor's surgery, and other amenities. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe.